there's something that we should do at a minimum to make sure that we are safer in the cyberspace.
Once you get started with it, you actually find that it's very straightforward and it actually makes sense.
It might be hard to start, but once you start and see that most of the times we're talking about basic principles, basic hygiene, to go with the parallel that we were doing earlier, we will see that there are companies that actually adopt at will certain guidelines because it's a good practice, right? So when they go to certify on a certain standard, they realize, hey, I already tick half of the boxes here because I do encryption at rest.
And it happens at the pace of technology. Like if you think about how regulation used to happen 200 years ago, it was very, very slow, right? Like, but now AI, in just a few years, it's the fastest adopted technology kind of ever. And so the regulation needs to, because of the potential impact is so huge.
All right, hi everybody. Welcome back to a new episode of Cybercrime from the Frontline, where we get the experts. So on this episode, we're going to talk about compliance. One of those subjects that people are probably thinking it's boring, but Raf, Stefan, and Mihai here, we're going to prove us wrong, and we're going to have a little conversation and understand the challenges, why people are trying to avoid adopting or pushing back on compliance, but also the opportunities and advantages when it comes to cybersecurity. So guys, introduce yourselves, tell us who you are, and let's get cracking.
Great. So I'm Raphael Perret, and I'm a Director of Product Management here at Bitdefender.
I'm Stefan Hanu, and I'm a manager at Attack Surface Analytics at Bitdefender.
Hi, I'm Mihai Leonte. My colleagues call me Macai. I'm the Director of Attack Surface Analytics here at Bitdefender.
All right, awesome, welcome. So this is your host, Dan Berthet, and we were talking about the subject because he's like, even when we are talking about it, there's some sort of like, well, I mean, there's a less love, I guess, because it's, you know, something that's, it's never the forefront of things. It's probably some sort of a, put it in an afterthought. It's not investigation. It's not it's not the forensics, the cool stuff. It's something that happens in the background, but that's not true. And this is why I want to talk to you about it today. So I know you, Mike, have a really good understanding of the broad situation of it. So what's going on?
So imagine this. We can't talk about compliance without talking about all the things that led us to this. So we know that the number of attacks increase over time, and we saw a lot of breaches, a lot of ransomware in the past couple of years, right? And let's stop and think, why does this happen? This happens because cyber criminals actually organize themselves like public companies. They have goals, they have profit margins that they need to get to, and this gets us to a point where we see more and more breaches. These breaches actually translate to damage, right? So if you are a company, if you are an organization that's in the public sector, you're gonna take damage. Now, put yourself in the place of the government that sees this damage. It needs to react. And how it will react? It will react with compliance and regulation. So it's not that you have compliance and that it's boring, but you have compliance because you need a way to fight and prevent everything that's happening as a movement.
So it's more like a framework that makes sure that or a lot of the basics are taken care of, and then we increase the cost of attack across the board, and then we know that some of the stupidest way that an organization get breached are no longer effective or least effective possible.
Think of it like this. Until some point in history, people weren't washing their hands, right? But once we realized that it's good for our health to do that, we got better as a society, right? It's the same with compliance. There's something that we should do at a minimum to make sure that we are safer in the cyberspace.
And I think, like, take the washing your hands example, that's still voluntary, you know, and that's good because people realized it was enough that people were told that this is what makes you healthy. This is really important. And then people started doing it. So the government didn't need to mandate hand washing. Okay, in some industries, maybe they still do a little bit, but when you look at seatbelts, we know that seatbelts save lives. And yet people weren't At the beginning, there were no seatbelts in cars. Then there were some car manufacturers added seatbelts because they know that it makes it safer. And then even with seatbelts, people weren't wearing them. And so that's where the government had to come in to say, look, it's not enough to just let you know that this is important. We're going to need to give you a little bit more of an incentive.
You're going to get
right?
a fine if you don't do that.
There's going to be
It's for your own good.
For your own good, but
Yeah.
it's not perceived that way though. That's what's interesting.
Not by everyone.
So I mean, because it sounds like, and I'm with you. It sounds like we're kind of trying to make compliance seem reasonable, which it is. But what's the opposition say, Stefan? What are they complaining about? What's
Having all those rules, all those things that you have to do inside the company, it's actually a daunting task for some, because you have a lot of new things that you have to invest in. You have a lot of time that you have to invest, and time is money. And there is a lack of knowledge, because even if you want to, let's say, be compliant, it's not like you just read a paper on the internet and just, okay, I'm going to do this and that and I'm compliant. So it involves a lot of work, and it makes it seem like a, let's say, more a impossible task for some. But once you get started with it, you actually find that it's very straightforward, and it actually makes sense for a company to have, let's say, this type of rules implemented, so that they can safeguard their clients and their property, their code, their products.
Yeah, Stefan is right. It might be hard to start, but once you start and see that most of the times we're talking about basic principles, basic hygiene, to go with the parallel that we were doing earlier, we will see that there are companies that actually adopt at will certain guidelines because it's a good practice, right? So when they go to certify on a certain standard, they realize, hey, I already tick half of the boxes here because I do encryption at rest. I make sure that the client data is protected, and so on and so forth. So it depends on how early you start, and be a bit brave about it. Don't be scared.
I mean, to me, it sounds like a lot of the businesses would like to be completely liberal and do whatever. You could give all the examples about the environment or whatever. It's like, yeah, I can just dump that chemical in the rivers. It's fine because it suits my way of doing business. But that's not how we collectively do it. And of course, it affects more people. And the government's not going to be nannying the companies for the sake of the companies themselves, but for the sake of the entire economy and industry. It makes sense that you don't want to make it at scale. So it all makes sense, right? But is it sensible? Regulators, how do they get the knowledge, and how do we match what the regulators want with what makes sense and what the companies could have?
The thing is that the world is going digital. There's no way around it. So more and more of our information, our lives, is going digital, and that makes it easier for us, creates opportunities.
We even have digital IDs now.
Yeah. But it also involves some risks, because you have all that information that it has to be protected, because the bad guys know there are companies that have useful data that they can sell, they can use, they can make a profit. So going digital means you have to protect all that information. And unfortunately, there have been some major breaches in the past. All the media has different kinds of red flags and information about all the things that happen, all the information that was stolen, all the millions of people that got their data in the wild. So
I'm going to interrupt you a bit. I think when we see this kind of attention for a certain breach, for a certain attack, that's an inflection point where a compliance goes from regulation to rule.
Yeah.
That's when you have certain rules applying. For
Yeah.
example, in Europe, you have GDPR to protect the customer data, right? Maybe in other places you have it as a guideline, but you had certain events that led to this.
You know, like mass personal data, you know, and this is GDPR is now what 10 years old, I think, in its application, roughly a little bit more. But there were these massive breaches at a time where people were just going online. You know, this was like the big booming years of the Google, Facebook, etc., right, era. And governments are seeing these breaches happening again and again and again, and they can't stand by. Just the same way that, you know, we were talking yesterday about when there's a really bad accident that happens on a stretch of road, like 5 times in a year,
You're gonna see new road signs.
redesign the
so
stretch
it
road,
might
yeah.
be like a speed bump, it might be like a speed trap, it might be a police officer there, but they can't. They have to do something, right?
It's for the public safety.
Yeah.
It's not because they want to do it because they have like a separate opinion. They
Or a
need to do
joy
it,
of like
yeah.
slowing
Yeah.
people down.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
like
for public
sometimes we have this
safety.
idea
You
of
know,
like governments are there to slow down companies.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
You need to do it so everyone is safe, right?
And when we talk about everyone, we can break that down. Like, what are the types of things that governments are going to be caring about, and that we can then translate into the regulation that we see around cybersecurity? There's going to be protecting, you know, individuals, and anything where like the population at large is going to be affected. So these are all of the privacy laws. So the GDPR, CCPA, PDPA, depending on where you live.
Yeah.
Then there's going to be critical infrastructure. And so this is basically saying like, well, if there's an issue there, it has knock-on effects for the like national security of the country, or, you know, and this is stuff like, you know, utilities and banking infrastructure, telco. And then you have, you know, like military government, where you're like, well, that's kind of more straightforward. Like, you want to make sure that like your military is well protected, otherwise.
That's a direct link to national security.
Yeah.
Yeah. No doubt.
And so the laws you see are reflect those things. So you've got things like GDPR. This is to protect the everyone. But then you have a lot of laws, and the majority of cybersecurity.
You also have compliance regulations that make sure that the economy stays afloat. For example, we have in the EU DORA that strictly regulates financial institutions. So, right, this is for the benefit of the economy, right? It covers the information and technology aspects of the financial sector, but still it's in place as a rule, not as a guideline, right?
And it's just the cybersecurity pendant of a lot of other regulations that we live with, and that have a lot of benefits to us in creating trust and stability, and making sure that you don't have a bank suddenly disappear with all of your money, which you obviously wouldn't want.
Or a bank, we shouldn't assume that the bank is badly intended, but maybe they get breached easily because they couldn't follow some basic...
See, I mean, that's interesting, because I was thinking about the same thing forever, and you guys have pointed to it. Like, I feel like a lot of it, because it's digital and unseen, is not valuable, or some email addresses and passwords. Who cares, right? Because it's not tangible, right? We're not gonna, like, if money starts missing, or, you know, the crown jewels of France start missing, or
Look
something
at this way.
physical.
If you have like a safe in a bank, you have like a big iron door, right? But you have like brick walls that can be easily penetrated. Do you think it's safe, or should you like make sure that the walls are also hardened?
Correct. And do you think we're at that point in time which we finally embrace the idea that, of course, marketers and others have figured out that, or hackers and the bad guys and organized crime have figured out the value of bits and bytes. But do you think the long tail of society has caught on yet? Are we there where everybody understands the value of little pieces of data stored somewhere and the impact it might have on actual life and property?
We're actually going there, because, for example, starting with the GDPR. So I think it works because it was the idea of GDPR was taken out from the EU and implemented in other countries. So I think that it's stable, that it works, it makes sense.
But also the place that we were back then is very different. Like nobody cared. When GDPR came out, it's like nobody cared. Okay, yes, there was some attention. There's a reason why it came to that point, but now it's just a lot more expected. Just the same way that when the first time that regulation about seatbelts came about,
Right.
everybody was like, "Oh, this is such a pain," and now
so
most
annoying,
people don't even think
restriction,
about it.
And then the manufacturer was like, "Oh, I have to add. It's going to cost me more."
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then how
the
do I even
testing
build
and,
a
yeah.
thing? And like, well, what's a good seatbelt?
I mean, I kind of like it's like yesterday when you had you've forgotten your password for some whatever account, they'll send it back to you in clear text over email. So we're not that long. That's not been that long ago in absolute terms, right? You tend to forget. And the same, like you said, like GDPR has been like a decade already, but it's kind of feels rather recent, right? Because maybe the effects and the long tail of the effects of it being implemented, and like you said, being implemented in other parts of the world and being the inspiration as these, California has implemented a lot of these regulations and so many others. My question is, I mean, I'm wondering, are we seeing some sort of a cohesiveness globally where we get we're getting to a point where we get something that's universally accepted. Okay, this is the baseline and we're not going to go behind this at all, below this?
So we have overlaps.
We
so
do.
if you look at the standards from the US, from the EU, or from other areas, there are overlaps.
Yeah,
right?
but there's no GDPR-like law
but because you have the basic hygiene that should be applied everywhere. Depending on geographic location or on industry, you might have specific regulation. You might have tighter. For example, if you work with the government, expect to see stricter rules, right? Because it's the link with national security is very obvious, right? Disrupting the supply chain when working with the government is very risky. So you're gonna see stricter regulation. If you go like in a sector that's like, for example, in retail, you might see looser regulation. So it depends. We should look instead at the fact that in the last years, I don't know, Stefan, how many new standards did we see? Or what's your take on this?
Well, even though we have new regulation, new standards, unfortunately, breaches do happen. Yeah. So we're still seeing companies being hacked. We're still seeing a lot of data going out there and a lot of losses, monetary losses from hackers. But the good news is governments are learning, and the companies are learning and are accepting that this needs to be done, and it's helpful. And so we have new standards popping up. We have revisions for older standards, so we can make sure they comply with all the latest and the newest technologies and things that are moving in the market.
Yeah, for example, we have all the AI hype right now, right? We're starting to see regulation for AI. It's a natural step, right? Because it's a new attack surface, basically.
And it happens at the pace of technology. Like if you think about how regulation used to happen 200 years ago, it was very, very slow, right? Like, but now AI, in just a few years, it's the fastest adopted technology kind of ever. And so the regulation needs to, because of the potential impact is so huge, the regulation is now moving faster than we've seen it. Like, it would be unimaginable to think about regulation coming after a technology that's just like 3 years ago when we're talking about like, these, LLMs, and yet we're seeing it, and it's not even, they've been working on it for a while.
Yeah, but how do you get, where's the trust come from for those who bring regulation? In the sense that the critics might say, well, we just got this technology a month ago. How do you already know what's wrong with it that we need to implement things? So, because I imagine that's
Well, usually when things go bad. Let's go back to Raf's example with the seatbelt. When did you realize you needed seatbelts? When people started dying. I'm not saying that it's the same case here with AI, but bad things might happen, right?
No, I mean, to me, it's obvious, but I mean, even the simplest things such as watermarking content that's generated by AI so you can differentiate it. There's no
or a
regulation
simple
around that.
suggestion. This is not like an expert in the field. This is just content that's generated automatically, right?
Yeah.
There are people that use AI for various stuff, even as a shrink, right? So you need to make clear the fact that it is a risk here.
Right, but I feel like the critics are saying, well, I mean, you're stifling something that's just growing, it's just happening. You're putting all these barriers on
You
this
don't need
technology.
to. You don't need to stop the growth. You need to make sure that the growth doesn't do damage. That's the only thing that you want to do with compliance, right?
I think for this particular example with AI, so most of the regulations so far were like responding to events that happened. So going back, analyzing what happened, doing some regulations so we make sure that particular thing doesn't happen again. So now for example, with AI, because things are happening so fast, I feel like all the regulations are trying to prevent and make sure that things don't happen before they actually start going mainstream. Like because even though they're not implementing, there is a chain of thought that's going on and proposals are being made.
But I think something to realize as well is that the regulator is not inventing things. And sometimes we think that like they're figuring out what's bad and what's not. They're generally not. Like let's go back to cybersecurity. None of these regulations are saying anything that is not common knowledge for cybersecurity experts. It's like, you should encrypt your data. You're like, okay.
I already knew that, yeah.
It's not like they invented it. They're just setting a bare minimum. Now, for things like AI, there is a good point to be made of like, but aren't you regulating too quickly before seeing the problems? But the reality is, we're seeing problems appear at the pace of adoption in AI. And these are things like non-consensual, deep fake, nudity and stuff like that are having real effect on real people. We've heard about cases of like suicide because the LLM said you should go and kill yourself. And so because those problems are arriving at the same pace as the adoption, they're trying to figure it out. But things are not static. Like the regulation that we have today about seatbelts and cars and airbags and it's iterations, and we're going to have the same. At first seatbelts were only for the front seats. Then we realized that the people behind were dying too. You're like, okay, so now, and so we should expect this. It's not going to be perfect, but that's okay.
Yeah, I like my comparisons. I was thinking about this, the new regulation that brought on past the seatbelts in automotive, that brought the lane keep and assist and the other nannies that people call, and everybody seems to collectively hate them. Like, oh, I don't need this stuff, and they want the buttons to be accessible so they can disable them as quickly as possible. So I guess what we're not seeing really is, as soon as these things became effective, I think of myself as a good driver. I think I can keep my lane, but I'm going to be honest with you, I would love it if I had a nanny to keep me in my lane when I'm not paying attention, or just because it's just easier, right? Ego doesn't precede me on this, but what I'm saying is, there's a PR optical issue where as soon as these things came into effect, maybe accidents, I'm sure accidents that previously would have happened without those tools now are not happening, but we don't hear about them because they never happened.
When it's effective.
You only hear about the bad thing, yeah.
Same with a lot of data protected on the GDPR, and it's just like you said, common sense. I can encrypt stuff. Like, we had less breaches that would I mean, of course, the number of breaches kind of constantly goes up as the attack surface widens and more organizations are privy to, and so on and so forth. But maybe on the same type of attacks, on the same kind of maybe the effort's higher for the attackers. The cost is higher for them to perform the attacks as previously because of regulation. That's a major win. It's just that we don't see a lot of that to back and make us feel good about the sacrifices
But maybe
committee.
what we should understand is that might be value in compliance, right? Can an organization look at this as something that brings value when you want to implement compliance?
I'm a massive proponent of seeing, compliance is a weapon that governments use to fight cybercrime at scale, right? But it's also a weapon that you can use as a security practitioner to drive the change that you want. Because the problems that we hear constantly about organizations, our customers, is that it's difficult to get budget. It's difficult to get people to care about security problems. And most of the time, the security teams, they know what should be done. You know you need stronger locks. You know you need encryption, but it's difficult.
You know you need EDR, but when you need to be compliant, and it says there that you need EDR, you also have the budget for it.
It changes the conversation, because now all of a sudden, instead of it being, hey, Raf, the security guy, he's biased, it's his job, wants to get a new toy to play with in the company. Instead, it's like, well, hey, look, per this law, you need to have this minimum bar, this safety belt, or you're going to be fined. And now we even see regulations where CISOs can be held criminally liable and go to jail.
In some cases, the fine might be bigger than the cost.
Yeah.
So if it's percentage of business.
Yeah, so for example, if you're looking at like the EU regulations, where in GDPR, it's 4% of worldwide revenue, the type of fine, you're like, okay, now you have a brilliant tool to do cybersecurity well. Because again, the regulations are not inventing new ways of doing cybersecurity. They're just mandating a minimum bar. And you can use that, and you can package a lot of the things that you've been trying to do to improve security. Because it improves security, it reduces risk. And you can package it, you get attention from executives, you get budget. Like, it's a lot easier to get budget when you bring up the word compliance than when you bring up the word security. And
yeah,
yet
because the problem
with
with security is you only look at it when you have the problem, right?
After the breach.
After the breach, yeah. But if you take a step back and look at it as a prevention method, compliance is an opportunity, right?
The fact that we're allowing ourselves the optimism of assuming there's not going to be a breach, just for the sake of the bottom line at the end of the year on the P&L sheet is insane. To me, this just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, because if you look like 3-5 years down the line, you can make sure that maybe it's not this year, but it's going to happen.
Yeah, if you want to be in business and you're serious about the business, I mean, you can't be that rabid about squeezing the tightest amount of profit because, well, we saved on the EDR investments.
Yeah.
I mean, and of course, it's also, I imagine, a competitive issue as well. Like, my direct competitor isn't following compliance, isn't making the necessary investments, so it's able to undercut me in the market. It's unfair competition, right? So you can see both sides, but at the same time, it's like, okay, when he gets attacked, I suffer as well, because it transforms and it affects the trust exactly everywhere. So then it's not going to work. So more attacks, bigger surface of attack, more compliance, more regulation.
Maybe
a lot. Yeah.
That's the trend, because we have seen an increasing number of regulations that are either going on a specific area, like financial or other types of institutions, and we're seeing a lot of let's say privacy-oriented ones, and they do make sense because they're all learning from the past and breaches that happened. But we also see that, for example, we have a lot of companies that decide to work with other companies that have been, let's say, following the rules, because it's a kind of a staple of a trust, because you know that
even if they don't have to.
Yeah. Yeah. So even if, for example, you have governments mandating things, and that's for the better good, we're seeing more and more companies actually seeing the value, because you open some new doors. You can do business with other companies that you find as trusted, and you just
In
like
some cases, you couldn't do business with
Yeah.
companies if you're not
Yeah,
trusted.
yeah.
So, for example, in SOC 2, some
Exactly.
businesses might say, if you're not compliant, I can't do business with you. It's not that I don't want to, I can't.
And
I'm
the
required.
regulated businesses, we're seeing that trickle down the supply chain, and we've got some customers that are coming to us, for help with compliance, even though they don't actually legally need to be compliant, but
They want
their
the business.
customers
Yeah.
are asking them questions and saying like, hey, look, we'd rather you follow, and it's also following a specific way of talking about things. So it's not just like, we mentioned that compliance is like this mandated minimum bar, but it also structures the way even we talk about things, right? So that means that you need to be doing encryption. And there are all of these things that, like, it structures the way that you're thinking about things the same way that if you were building a new building and you want it to be safe, what do I know about making a safe building? However, if I look at the regulation tells me, like, this is what needs to be done for it to be safe against fire. Boom, 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 boom. This is what needs to be done for it to be safe against a collapse because if I'm in an area that has seismic activity from earthquakes. And so now I have a roadmap, and I can speak the same language, like this common language with everyone. And that creates a lot of efficiency, right? I'm not in the dark anymore. I can follow a plan.
So it seems like obviously saving money on the long term, what it might seem like it's costing more upfront.
Yeah, and you also have, for example, breaches do happen. Even if you follow all the rules and you implement all the regulations, breaches do happen. Yeah, but you do have the advantage of having all those things that help you go back online faster and safer, because you implement all the backups, you do all the things that you need to do. So even if that happens, you actually have a lesser damage than if you wouldn't have implemented all the regulations.
Yeah,
Even
that's
if you
true.
do it against kind of,
Yeah.
That's
not
so
really
you have guidelines and laws that actually require you to do backups, to
Exactly.
have disaster recovery plans. Yeah, so even if you were not thinking about it, now you are.
have to.
Yeah.
I have to, exactly.
All right. So with that, we're gonna pin the conversation. I'm sure we're gonna have another episode on future iterations of compliance. I want to thank you guys joining me and talking about this. Again, Cybercrime from the Frontline, the only podcast where the experts are front and center. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you on the next one.